By the end of this module, you should be able to explain what is meant by the terms dignity, respect, equality, and diversity in the context of everyday life. You should be able to describe the philosophy and components of the Equality Act 2010 and its implications for practice in customer care and treatment. You should also be able to reflect on how individual practice might change to incorporate dignity, respect, equality, and diversity into all aspects of customer care and treatment. First, let's consider the term equality. Equality is not about treating everyone in the same way, but it recognizes that people have different needs and these can be met in different ways. Equality focuses on those areas covered by law that have been put in place to prevent people from being treated unfavourably on a range of specific factors. For example, their race, their gender, or disability. Diversity is about respecting and valuing the difference in individuals. A diversity approach aims to recognize, value, and manage difference in individuals and to positively strive to meet the needs of different people. Watch this brief video focused on the Equality Act 2010.
The Equality Act of 2010 is the next generation of equality law. It's a result of literally years of thought and debate about how best to build on the anti-discrimination laws of the past. So now we have it, and we at the Equality and Human Rights Commission believe that this is the right platform for 21st century to become fairer and more equal than ever before. The provisions of the Act will come into force on the 1st of October 2010. The government still has to make up its mind on a few aspects of the law, but without question, this will be a step change. It will make a huge difference to very many people. So it's vital that everyone understands exactly what this groundbreaking legislation will mean for them.
The first thing the Act does is simplify and harmonise the law. British equality law had grown up piecemeal from the 1960s onwards. Over time, it had grown increasingly complex and hard to understand. The new Act puts all the equality law in one place. It makes it easier to understand and easier to respect. This should reduce the burden on private companies and public bodies. The Act also extends the law in some areas. Some new protections will take effect from October 2010. People who are caring for a disabled child or relative will be protected from discrimination at work. In most cases, employers will no longer be allowed to ask job applicants about their health. This will stop employers screening out disabled people during the recruitment process. And the Act makes clear that mothers can breastfeed their children in places like cafes and shops and not be asked to leave. There are further elements in the Act that will not come into force in October 2010, but may do in the future. The government has said it will make an announcement at a later stage. For example, a single public sector equality duty would mean that public authorities such as schools or local councils would have to take positive steps to consider the needs of people from all different backgrounds. A socio-economic duty would mean that some strategic public authorities would need to think about the impact of their decisions on people from different social backgrounds. Provisions on age discrimination would protect older people from unfair treatment in places like shops and hospitals. And part of the Act would give the government the option of requiring larger private and voluntary sector employers to publish details of the differences between men and women's pay in their organisation. The Equality and Human Rights Commission will update its guidance as and when the government makes announcements.
The Equality and Human Rights Commission has a big role to play in bringing the Equality Act to life. The Commission is what we like to call a modern regulator. Where there are serious problems, we don't hesitate to use those hard-edged tools at our disposal, including legal action. But we want to make it easy for everyone to get it right from the word go. That is why we're publishing online practical advice on the Act. It's simple and it's straightforward. It's in plain English and it's got plenty of relevant examples. And we've done everything we can to ensure there are examples from every sector, including small businesses, large employers, charities, the public sector and voluntary groups. But if the answer you want is not there, then you can simply go to our helpline where you can find further information or where you will be directed in the right place.
At heart, the Equality Act is just about treating people fairly, with dignity and with respect. Whether you're a shopkeeper who wants to keep the customers coming back, or you're an employer who wants to recruit the best staff, or a public service provider who wants to win the public's confidence, this isn't just the right thing to do, it's common sense, and it's in your best interests. So it's over to you now. I hope you'll play your part. If each of us does the small things that the Act asks of us, then together we can make a big difference.
The purpose of the Equality Act lies in strengthening, harmonising and streamlining 40 years of equalities legislation. Strengthening by improving the effectiveness of equality legislation, harmonising by providing the same levels of protection from discrimination across all the protected characteristics and all sectors where appropriate, and streamlining by simplifying and consolidating approximately 116 pieces of separate equality legislation. Protected characteristics include such elements as age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and belief, sex and sexual orientation. So where does the Act apply? Well, just about everywhere. It applies to services and public functions, premises, work, education, associations including political parties. So what does this mean for society? Well, it means extending the equality duty to require the public sector to take into account the needs of all protected groups, except marital and civil partnership status. It means protecting disabled people from potentially discriminatory questions in the recruitment process for employment. It means protecting carers from discrimination. And it means protecting pregnant women and mothers from discrimination when using services. Prohibited conduct applies to most of us. It prohibits direct discrimination, including by association and perception, indirect discrimination, which now covers all characteristics, and pregnancy and maternity discrimination. Prohibited conduct includes such things as harassment, third-party harassment, discrimination arising from disability, and ignoring our duty when dealing with people to make reasonable adjustments in order to meet their needs. Other key provisions include the public sector equality duty to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimization, to advance equality of opportunity for all, and to foster good relations. Positive action provisions permits proportionate action to overcome disadvantage, meet needs, and tackle underrepresentation. Let's consider the term dignity. It is a term which is used in two major ways. Dignity is a quality of the way we treat others as human beings, or dignity is a quality of, say, an older person's inner self. Personal dignity and self-image relates to self-esteem and self-respect. We all have expectations of being treated with dignity. Respect is a term which is intimately related to dignity. It is a verb, an action or doing word. Therefore, perhaps a more appropriate term would be respect for dignity, rather than dignity and respect. We should have respect for people's rights, their freedoms, their habits, their culture, their values, their modesty, their personal space, and their personal capabilities. There are a variety of types of dignity. First and foremost is dignity of the human being. This is enshrined in conventions and laws. It involves the right to life, the right to not be abused, the right to justice, privacy, to not be discriminated against, and freedoms and respect of conscience, religion, expression, and association. In society, there are a variety of individuals who could be considered as vulnerable adults. It is very important that vulnerable adults are treated as human beings. Meeting the human needs of vulnerable adults includes meeting their need for personal identity, meeting their need for their merits to be recognized, and meeting their need for moral status to be recognized. Dignity of personal identity refers to a person's personal identity, their sense of self-respect, their sense of self-esteem, self-resilience, and their personal relationships. Dignity of merit relates to individual achievements, rank and seniority, their place in society, any honours awarded, their employment, knowledge and skills, experience, qualifications, financial worth, success in life, and independence. And finally, dignity of moral status. This relates to people's moral principles, perhaps their religious faith, community membership, leadership, and their recognized roles. All in all, there are 4 types of dignity: dignity of the human being, dignity of personal identity, dignity of merit, and dignity of moral status. In order to treat people as human beings, we need to meet people's human needs. Primarily, this will involve directly the dignity of the human being, the need for personal identity, need for merits to be recognized, and need for moral status to be recognized. When encountering people in everyday life, either personally or professionally, we need to be mindful that we are demonstrating appropriate respect for their personal dignity. The Human Rights Act states that all human beings endowed with reason and conscience are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood, and to be protected against the random misfortunes of life, whatever their origins. The underpinning values of this statement are life and freedom from abuse, justice, privacy, freedoms of thought, conscience, religion, expression and association, and the prohibition of discrimination. The Human Rights Act is made up of articles and protocols, and sometimes these articles and protocols can easily be breached. If we take the example of someone who's been admitted to hospital, for instance, we can see some further examples of how breaches can take place. For instance, the right to life. This could be breached by no proper assessment of needs taking place, the prohibition of torture or abuse or degrading treatment. This might equate as somebody not being given enough food or fluids. The right to liberty and security might be breached by somebody being given sedatives, tranquilizers, and restrained physically outside of legal requirements. The right to respect for privacy and family life. That could be somebody going through someone's belongings without their permission. Freedom of thought, conscience and religion could be breached by restricting access to a place of worship, for instance. Freedom of expression could be breached by people not knowing how to complain. Freedom of assembly and association could be breached by limitations being imposed with personal, including sexual relationships. The prohibition of discrimination could be breached by reduced access to health services or disability-related rationed health care. Protection of property, that could be breached by a lack of respect for personal property whilst the person is an inpatient. One of the most disadvantaged groups in society are people with a learning disability, and these statistics make some interesting reading. There are about 1.5 million, nearly 3 in every 100 in the UK, who have a learning disability. Less than 1 in 5 people with a learning disability actually work, compared with 1 in 2 disabled people generally. At least 65% of people with a learning disability actually want to work. Of those people with a learning disability that do work, most only work part-time and are low paid. Just 1 in 3 people with a learning disability take part in some form of education or training. 58,000 people with a learning disability are supported by daycare services. 29,000 adults with a learning disability live with parents aged 70 or over, many of whom are too old or frail to continue in their caring role. In only 1 in 4 of these cases have local authorities planned alternative housing. Most friends of people with a learning disability also have learning disabilities. 30% say they do not have any contact with friends. 5% have no friends and do not see anyone apart from their family. 40% say they would like more say in what goes on in their everyday life. 30% say they did not feel safe using public transport. 30% said someone had been rude or offensive to them in the last year. In most cases, the person who bullied them was a stranger. People with learning disabilities are more likely to have a long-term illness or another disability than other people. Only 25% of women with a learning disability have ever had a cervical smear. Another significantly disadvantaged group in society are people with mental illness. 1 in 4 people will experience some kind of mental health problem in the course of a year. Mixed anxiety and depression is the most common mental disorder in Britain. Women are more likely to have been treated for a mental health problem than men. About 10% of children have a mental health problem at any one time. Depression affects 1 in 5 older people. Suicide rates show that British men are 3 times as likely to die by suicide than British women. Self-harm statistics for the UK show one of the highest rates in Europe, 400 per 100,000 population. Only 1 in 10 prisoners has no mental disorder. 12% of people have stated they would not want to live next door to someone who has a mental health problem. 60% of people describe a person with a mental health problem as someone who has to be kept in a psychiatric or mental hospital. 33% think people with mental health problems should not have the same rights to a job as everyone else. Only 31% of people think mental hospitals are an outdated means of treating people. Stigma and discrimination stops engagement in day-to-day activities, such as shopping, going to the pub, taking a holiday, obtaining insurance, making new friends, joining a club, talking openly to other family members, and prevents effective engagement with health professionals. Goffman in 1963 said of stigma, "It's an attribute that makes the person different from others in the category of persons available for him to be, and of a less desirable kind. He is thus reduced in our minds from a whole and usual person to a tainted and discounted one." This is a significant depiction of stigma and discrimination. During our everyday contact with people, there is a danger that we may make automatic assumptions about them based on stereotyping. we run the risk of attributing to them certain traits and behaviours that may not actually be the case. We can miss seeing the bigger picture, and this influences how we treat people, and even whether we treat them with respect for dignity or regard and due consideration for equality and diversity. As an example, watch the following short video clip.
Right. There's only one way to do this. You'll have to be cut. It's the only way.
I like some cheese for lunch. A hoodie with a knife, who turns out to be a rather attractive middle-aged man cutting some cheese for lunch. What, however, were your initial assumptions, and how did that affect your thinking? A dying 101-year-old war hero was sent home from hospital by taxi, wearing only a nappy and a set of ill-fitting pyjamas. Brigadier John Platt, who won the Distinguished Service Order for his bravery in battle, was left degraded and humiliated by his treatment by Salisbury District Hospital, his family say. Brigadier Platt had spent 5 days on a mixed-sex ward, during which his hearing aid was stepped on and crushed, his false teeth went missing, and his soiled pyjamas were piled up in a locker by his bed for the duration. He was unable to feed himself and was discharged in an incontinent and confused state, clutching a bag of his dirty clothes. Brigadier Platt, who took part in one of the fiercest battles of the Italian campaign during the Second World War, died several days after his hour-long journey home to Morpeth in Northumberland. His daughter-in-law Amanda described his treatment as disgraceful. She added, "All that he had at the end of his 101 years was his dignity, and they took that away from him. You just don't do that to people. I was so furious. I think respect in that situation is the same as compassion. I just can't believe that any hospital would keep excrement-covered clothing in a locker for 5 days. I got the impression this lack of attention must be endemic because it was so lightly treated." Brigadier Platt was awarded the DSO for bravery after leading men of the 2nd Battalion, the Somerset Light Infantry, in an assault across the Gagliano River in May 1944. He was wounded twice during the operation. Mrs. Platt said, "Everybody's got to die. He was obviously going to die and he wanted to die. It wasn't because he was a heavily decorated soldier, but I felt they didn't acknowledge he was an old man of 101 who deserved respect." In a statement, the hospital said, "Some aspects of Brigadier Platt's discharge from hospital in 2006 were unacceptable, and the Trust apologises for any distress that this has caused." Dignity of the human being. There was the loss and damage to private property, his confusion and incontinence issues, his clothing, the humiliation he must have felt. He was neglected. Were there hygiene issues? He was on a mixed-sex ward. What effect did this have on a man of his years? His discharge home, he was sent alone in a taxi. There was no support, no apparent consideration. Is ageism a factor here? He's so old it doesn't matter. There was a lack of assessment of his needs. And what about dying with dignity? Dignity of personal identity. What consideration was given to his self-esteem and self-image? His body was failing. This must have resulted in feelings of frustration and hopelessness. What about his need for respectful treatment? Dignity of merit. He had been a senior army officer, highly decorated in wartime. He had served his country. Should he not have expected some commensurate treatment with dignity, reflecting his rank and status, his achievements and contribution to society? Dignity of moral status. He had been responsible for the lives and welfare of hundreds of people. He was honoured and respected by the people he would have been in charge of. He was a leader. He should have had expectations of being at least worthy of respect for his contribution. I'll leave you with this one final message. In professional or everyday life, when meeting and interacting with or dealing with others, you may find it useful to consider, in terms of respect for dignity, equality and diversity, 2 key questions. Number 1, how would I want to be treated? Number 2, how would I want a loved one or someone close to me to be treated? Thank you for your time and attention.